I'm Mark Ryan. I work for Dakota County. I'm in our Environmental Resources Department, so there's just a handful of us that work in that department on the Byllesby Dam. And then we work with our other groups, our Facilities Management Group and other groups at the county. Brad's name is on here too. He couldn't be here today, so he said, you go forth and do it, Mark. He's our kind of Water Resources Manager. His daughter is doing, he's from this area. His daughter's doing her last track meet, I think, of probably her college career or something like that. So he told me he's driving 5 hours to watch about 5 minutes of shot put, and then that's about it today. So, like I said, I'm Mark Ryan. I'm our Senior Water Resources Engineer, so I work more kind of on the technical side of dam operations and dam safety. I'm a civil engineer by background, so if questions get too electrically focused, I may not be able to answer them, but I work more on kind of the water and operations side of the dam. So I put this presentation together. It's mostly just kind of general information, mostly photos, so I'm going to try not to kill you with bullet points and things like that, like you see with a lot of presentations. So we'll just kind of walk through this, mostly history and kind of just sort of general information about the dam. Chief McCormick did send me a few questions that kind of were submitted too, so I tried to put those kind of in at the end to give some information for that. Okay, so here's a drone photo of the dam, and I've got a better one that kind of shows sort of the different components. This was taken before our current powerhouse upgrade project too, so that's the old original powerhouse here from 1911 shown in this photo here. But you can see the reservoir on the upstream side. We have about 55 feet of head, we call it, from the reservoir pool down to the river level below. So I would say height-wise, we're kind of a middle dam. Size-wise, we're kind of a smaller dam compared to what you see out there. And yeah, let's just keep moving. So I mentioned I'm with Dakota County. So we are currently an owned and operated facility by Dakota County. There was many years there where we had a partner operator out there. You may have known people that worked for North American Hydro or Eagle Creek, are kind of the last couple names that they had. So they operated the dam kind of in a partnership with Dakota County and for a while Goodview County too, for, I don't know, roughly from like the mid 80s to about 2018. But at the end of sort of a lease agreement with Excel and them, the county decided, let's go through this upgrade project and then we'll sort of be the sole owners and operators of the dam moving forward. We're located about 2 miles upstream of Cannon Falls. We now have, kind of as part of taking over operations, we have 2 full-time operators, Dave and DJ, so they're there essentially every day. We try and make sure everybody has a shift at least. They're not there 100% of the time, like 24/7, but they're there every day to kind of check levels. And then we've got some sort of measures for them to get information or phone calls and that kind of thing if they get alarms when they're away from the building too. So our new plant, I had to run through and update a little bit of this information. So we have 2 Kaplan style units, and I've got some pictures to kind of show what that means later too. So the output of the plant, once we're fully up and running here, is going to be about 4 megawatts. So our the original turbines that were in there for essentially over 100 years, those produced about 2.3 megawatts at a maximum. So we've almost doubled our capacity for power production. What we used to say was we could almost or pretty much power the number of homes in Cannon Falls with what the dam had. So now, like going forward, our max production would be, basically twice the size of Cannon Falls. Now, that isn't what we produce all the time. We're kind of dependent on what the river flow is and what we can run through our units. The facility is a run-of-river operation, so that means we can't limit the water that's coming out or increase the water that's coming out. We have to maintain that reservoir on the upstream side and basically pass what's coming through. So the last few years maybe not last year, but a couple years before that, where we had drought and we only had maybe 100 cubic feet per second in the river, which is really low, that's all that we would get for operation, and that would basically be too low for us to produce any power. So we can't really manipulate the river, we just kind of take it as it comes and use the river flow that we're kind of given. So it's the full structure is about 1,000 foot long in total. I've got some better kind of slides on that piece. So here's an overview map. You can kind of see on the right-hand side where Cannon Falls is. Like I said, it's about 2 miles upstream. This map is showing kind of the main structure here is at the Byllesby Dam right on the Cannon River on the downstream side. We also consider that that perimeter dike a part of the dam. So that's basically just an earthen embankment that's kind of where Gerlach Way is located out there. It kind of connects to where where the park is to where some of the lakeshore resident homes are. So that there is actually a kind of a dike there too. Normally the water isn't up to the top of that dike. It's just kind of a sort of an emergency barrier to kind of hold back water if we were to get some really high floods. And it's not super tall too. Question?
When you say 2 miles downriver or upriver,
yeah.
Is it considered, is 2 miles, what is it from where the crow flies, so to speak?
I gotcha, yeah. I think that's as the crow flies,
oh,
the 2 miles. It might be river length. I'm not sure actually, but I think that's kind of as the crow flies. These are probably a 1/4 mile each, these sections. So
sure.
As the crow flies, it's probably a little less than that, you know, maybe a mile to 52 here in this kind of part of town.
Okay, great, thank you.
So just a little background too on the Cannon River watershed. I don't know how many people are familiar with how big the Cannon River watershed is. I guess it's not that big in the grand scheme of rivers. It's kind of a medium-sized watershed. But so our watershed extends all the way down to south of, a good way south of Owatonna, not quite to Albert Lee there. So that's Freeborn County is essentially kind of the edge. It kind of goes into Freeborn County a little bit. And then you have the Straight River, if you're familiar with Owatonna. The Straight River runs through Owatonna and then connects into the Cannon in Faribault there. So we kind of have, I think it's 7 or 8 counties that are touched by the watershed. It's a large area. It is a little bit, every river is unique. So a lot of times what we see is if we get really heavy rain down here, that's kind of, the Straight River is very channelized. And so we'll see that flow come in pretty fast to Faribault. But then if we get really heavy rain over on the west side, there's a lot of lakes and pools and ponds and stuff, so sometimes that takes longer. Last year when we were experiencing flooding, you probably saw in the news that some of those lakes and other places out to the west, the lakes themselves were actually flooding, so people's lake homes or homes were experiencing basement flooding and that kind of thing too, just because that area tends to back up. It's really wet, it's got a lot of natural lakes in that area too. We do, so really the Cannon River is coming, or sorry, the Straight River is coming in here, the Straight and Cannon together are coming up through Northfield and then coming into the end of the reservoir here. One thing that I like to talk about is that, you know, we think about that river coming through Northfield and that's what comes into the reservoir. Well, there's a substantial amount of little creeks and things that when it rains, they do add a good amount of water that comes directly into the reservoir from the side. So the ones that we look at are, the main ones that we look at are Prairie Creek, which is here. It kind of goes down almost to like Nerstrand. And that's more of a true like natural area type creek. And then we also, on our side on Dakota, we have Chubb Creek up here. So every once in a while we'll see times where, you know, maybe the flow on the Northfield doesn't go up as much as we're thinking, but if we get a lot of rain right at the reservoir, we'll see increases at the dam just because that water is kind of coming through all those little creeks and things that flow into the reservoir itself. And then downstream, you know, we're putting out upstream on the upstream side of where the Little Cannon comes in too. So sometimes the Little Cannon gets a lot of water and we don't get as much water, so people will see maybe more flooding downstream because that Little Cannon is contributing a lot of water too. So yeah, that's kind of the main piece of this. The other piece of what we have for the watershed would be there's a number of stream gauges. So the USGS, it's called, the United States Geological Survey, that's a federal agency, and they work with us to put up river gauges. So we're able to see the flow. For a long time, we had one gauge, and it was at Carleton College, and I think our operators had to dial a phone number and get that information to kind of tell us what flow rate is coming into the dam, what do we need to prepare for. And now we have a gauge in Faribault, we have a gauge on the Straight River, we have a gauge in Northfield, we have one just over kind of on the other side of town on the 9th Street Bridge, there's a gauge there too, so that tells us kind of what we think we're putting out at the dam for flow. And then there's also the Welch gauge is kind of like the historic record for the Cannon River. So there's been a river gauge there for probably 75 years. Yeah, question?
Question and comment.
Yeah.
I'm about 10 miles south here where I live.
Yeah.
And the east fork of the Little Cannon runs in there.
Okay.
And there was substantial flooding here a few years back. And now there's actually river gauges on the roads there, the bridges. And they don't sound like they're the ones you use. Where does that data go?
Okay, sure, yeah. So there are, the National Weather Service, I think, also has a few gauges too, and I know that they have one on the Little Cannon in town. So they may have those ones that also go upstream on that, onto the Little Cannon and the different forks too. I'd have to look for sure to know exactly who manages that gauge.
Yeah, just another comment.
Yeah.
In the year that it flooded the cannon, the town here, it was very isolated, a lot of water, actually around my area. We got 12 inches of rain in a short period of time. And the valleys that usually have a small stream to them were totally full of water. And over the roads, and I'm talking about bridge type.
Oh, wow.
So.
Not just culverts, full
No,
bridges
no,
where it's going over the road, yeah.
Some of that raised roadway with culverts on it were 20 or 30 feet above the valley floor. And the water was high enough that it was running over the top of those.
Wow. Yeah. That's cool. I have some old flood information too in here too, so we'll get to that as part of the presentation. So a little bit kind of more about the history, and some of this might be kind of repeating and stuff like that, but so the dam was constructed in 1911. I've got some photos coming up of that too. So that was done by the Henry Byllesby Company, the Amberson Hydraulic Company for Henry Byllesby. Byllesby was kind of, I think, one of the early developers of Consumers Power, which then became Northern States Power and became Excel eventually. So NSP operated the facility, essentially Excel operated the facility from 1911 to about 1969. And I think at that time they thought, well, this is going to take a lot to redo the facility and keep it running for the next life cycle. So they sold the facility to Dakota and Goodhue at that time. I've heard, I don't know for sure, but I've heard that they sold it to us for $1 at that time too. So read into that what you would. It maybe wasn't, it was a gift, but it's the gift that keeps on giving cost-wise for the commies for sure. So, so the facility had a period there where it wasn't really operated too much. The stories I've heard is that lake residents, the early lake residents and people would actually go out there and pull boards and operate some of these things during flood events to keep it sort of functioning in a basic level at that time. Back in the 70s, kind of the late 70s, there was a bunch of money and time that went into improving the safety of the dam, and then at that time, that was when Eagle Creek or its predecessors put money into the turbines themselves, basically tore the turbines all the way out, rebuilt everything, or at least rebuilt the electrical components of everything to make them more modern for the time. And that finished kind of in the early 80s then, but really 1985 is kind of when we said that started. So then they ran those the original turbines with new generation equipment from about 1985 to 2018. or 2019. The only other kind of major point in there, in 2009, Goodhue County sold its stake in the dam to the county, and that was kind of when we became the sole owner of the full dam facility itself. And I mentioned some of that piece earlier. The only other note then, as we were kind of going through taking over operation of the dam too, we were looking at sort of the next life cycle. We got 35 years out of those refurbished turbines, but the condition of them, given that the turbines themselves were 100 years old, was really starting to be not economical, or at the very least, you'd have to put a lot of money into them to keep them running long term. So the decision was made to do this powerhouse upgrade project, address some safety elements of the dam, and then also just completely put in new turbines as part of that project. So that's what we're working on now, and I've got a few slides and pictures of that upcoming.
Question.
Yeah.
Why did Goodhue County elect to leave and turn it over to Dakota?
I'm not 100% sure. My guess is that the costs were what did it. In addition to the operating costs for the dam, there's a number of studies and dam safety work that we have to do kind of routinely. And so because that has a cost to it, I'm guessing that's why they decided to sell that piece, or sell their kind of stake in it.
How were they sharing the power, the money that was brought in by the power?
Yeah, so
was it on a share base 50-50 or what was it?
I don't think it was 50-50. I think it was, the original power purchase agreement had maybe 4 parties. So at least for the last 35 years, it had Dakota, Goodhue, until Goodhue sold its stake. But Dakota, the private operating company, and then Xcel Energy was also getting a piece of that through that power purchasing agreement. And I don't think that was quite 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. I think it was probably split a little bit differently. Moving forward, we'll be basically selling our power on the open market. So it'll be, the idea is that it's 100% for Dakota County once we're up and running and selling that power.
When you say you're selling it on the open market,
Yeah.
I assume it's going into the power grid.
That's right.
And when you say the open market, does that mean Xcel or other companies besides Xcel?
Yeah, so it probably will be other companies. I don't want to bore you guys with what the details of it, but you can look it up if you want to read more. There's something called the MISO, so it's the Midwest Independent System Operator, and basically they manage the grid for the Midwest. And so they're figuring out what upgrades need to be done to the power network, who can kind of sign up and say, I'm selling my power, and then we also have a company that will kind of market our power for us. And with the number of like solar gardens, wind farms, other kind of newer, smaller type plants, that's kind of the way that those people have been able to sell power, is through this grid manager, the MISO. Let's see. So historical photos. So this is, I think we got this one from the Historical Society. This is a picture of what was at roughly the location of the dam prior to the dam being built. I don't know where the term Big Falls came through. I think because this was maybe the Big Cannon River and the other one was the Little Cannon, that was why it got that name. They certainly aren't a very tall natural waterfall or anything like that. But that's kind of roughly what it looked like, probably in the 1890s or 1800s before the dam was built. So here's a picture of construction. This looks like it's probably pretty early on, just kind of the excavation of the bedrock area and some of the probably steam shovel and other equipment that they were using back then. Another picture of construction. So I think that this one is sort of from the perspective of if you were on the Dakota side of the lake, where a boat launch is, and then looking downstream, this is kind of the north end. Our powerhouse would be sort of in that main section there. And then here's a picture of one of the labor crews working on the dam. So my understanding is that they had roughly 500 to 600 people on site working on the dam. A lot of the concrete was poured, by wheelbarrow and other kind of manual methods. The impressive thing was it took them about a year to build it. I mean, they had so many people here. Back then, labor was kind of the cheap piece. Concrete was expensive, but labor was cheap. So they could hire a lot of people and get the dam essentially built. I think it took probably another year or two to actually get the turbines and kind of the internal stuff going. But the fact that they built the concrete structure itself in about a year is extremely impressive. And I haven't heard anything about how far away laborers came from or anything like that to work on the project. But it might be kind of an interesting history investigation or something to learn more about that. And then here's kind of a picture of some of the first years of operation. It's quite a bit different now, though the powerhouse, the way it was then, was the same way it was up until 3 years ago when we tore off that original structure. One kind of cool thing that changed many years ago, I don't even know when, but that building up the top there is actually over where the intakes to the power facility would be, and that was kind of the way that a lot of dams were built then. Now it's just open to the elements essentially, and I know when our operators see that, they kind of think about, man, it would be really nice to have a building up there again so we're not dealing with ice and cold weather and working on some of those intake parts of the dam. So this is a picture inside the old powerhouse when the turbines were being kind of rebuilt in the late 70s or early 80s. So you can kind of see that they really took apart just about everything inside there. I think this piece there in the center is kind of like almost a hole in the floor where that old turbine would drop down. That wheel is part of the original generator there. So I think essentially they took everything apart down to the frames and base structure of it and rebuilt it then. So just another overview photo. So this was kind of prior to our spillway upgrade project. So this is what it looked like up until maybe 2013 or so. And that was kind of the culmination of years of us talking with, so from a dam safety standpoint, we're regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the FERC we call it. So they have authority over dams in the country. They do both power operation and dam safety. We're a small enough facility where we don't have a true FERC license. We're exempt from a FERC license because we're producing less than 5 megawatt hours at a maximum. But because of the proximity of the dam to Cannon Falls and the sort of high hazard associated with that, they do come and review us from a dam safety standpoint. So we get an annual review from them, an annual inspection, and then kind of certain reports and things that we have to submit every year. We have to have an independent consultant come and look through the dam every 5 years or so. So there's a bunch of kind of dam safety checks from that federal level for us on the facility. So the main thing that they had told us for, I think probably the 2000s and into the early 2010s was, if you get a massive flood out here, you don't have the ability to pass all the water that's coming to the facility. So that kind of pushed us into this previous kind of big project we did where we added a spillway in 2014. So this will kind of go through the different components. So that's the powerhouse there. Probably the words are going to be hard to read on there, but hopefully you can see the yellow outlines at least to kind of guide you through where each component is. So that is the powerhouse there. This is kind of a legacy structure. It's called a fishway. We think it was maybe built for fish passage originally, but they never actually built anything in there like a fish ladder or anything like that. It was sort of a set-aside thing that maybe was a requirement. There's a lot of dams you see nowadays either new dams or sort of retrofitted ones where they'll add different like fish ladders and things like that to allow for fish passage and kind of restore that natural fish passage component. It's a big deal, especially in like the Pacific Northwest where they've got migrating salmon and that kind of thing where they're trying to restore things. Question?
Yes, I'm wondering what you think the percentage of risk is for the present dam. I live a quarter of a block from where the water comes over, where the dam used to be.
Yeah.
And I know that we got some kind of something about how much time we had to get from my house up to the top of the hill.
Okay, sure.
So what percentage of risk would you say I still have?
I guess it'd probably be hard for me to quantify it as a percentage. I would say the risk of dam, like a dam breach event, that's what we prepare for and that's what we send out the materials for, is kind of that worst case scenario where we have a large breach and water really quickly. I would say that the new gates have really lessened that risk, or sort of brought down our risk through installing those gates, because they allow us to pass that much more water without it overtopping or going places where the water shouldn't be going. So by doing that project, that hopefully has purchased out or bought out that risk in having an event where we actually see the dam breach itself. That combined with our powerhouse upgrade is mostly about providing additional power, but we did also put like additional concrete into some of the lower levels of the dam and do other sort of dam safety upgrades or essentially cleanup work for some of the dam components too, to also further buy down that risk. And I've got a little bit more on the sort of downstream and awareness stuff here at the end of the presentation too. All right. So fishway, overflow spillway. So the middle section of the dam, now we don't use it that much. It's kind of an emergency overflow. So if we did get a big flood, we've got these trip gates there. They'll sort of fall down and allow more water to go over the center part of the dam there. It's a controlled structure, but it's not like a gate that we could move up and down or something like that. It's just a sort of in-between area where the water can spill over. Did you have a question?
Oh, when does the water level go up? I heard May 15th.
Yes, yeah. So yes, tomorrow is May 15th, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So yes, tomorrow we will start moving towards the summer pool. I didn't mention at the start, so when I mentioned that run-of-river operation, so that's kind of a DNR operating condition for us. We have to do we can only pass the water that comes to us, essentially. The other condition that was put in back in the 80s, kind of when the dam was restarted, was that we have to do this winter drawdown. And kind of the reason that I've been told for that is that the groundwater is so connected to the river and the reservoir and a lot of the fields around the reservoir that difference in level, if we're at summer pool, can create issues for people getting into the fields or create issues for people's basements in that springtime condition. So every year in the fall, we lower the reservoir to 853.7, and then in the spring, just at Memorial Day, we raise it up to 856.7. So there's kind of a 3-foot difference between the two conditions. And I think it works. For us, there's a lot of ice challenges and things that we could face with a different situation. So we just kind of accept the DNR permit for what it is and kind of stick with those bounds for the operating level. I keep forgetting that there's actually a little button on here I have to click rather than the screen itself. So these are the South Crest gates, the new spillway that I talked about. These were installed in 2014. Essentially, we can put through a good amount, like a heavy flood, even close to maybe the flooding that we saw in 1965 through these gates alone, once the water in the reservoir, if it were to bounce up. The other thing that they've allowed us to do when we had flooding last year, we were able to pass that flood essentially through these gates and our other two smaller gates so that we didn't have the lake bounce significantly when we had that water. I think it probably went up about a foot. I think what I heard back in 2010, before we had these gates, when we had a similar flood, it was up 3, 4, 5 feet or something like that on the reservoir. So it gives us a lot more ability to kind of control that reservoir level too. There we go. So north on, that's just kind of another section of the dam. It's not meant to have water going over around it. It does tie into an embankment for a short way there, and then that kind of just transitions into the, sort of where the park is over there, transitions into the natural grade there. This is the bedrock spillway, so that water that's being passed by our south gates is kind of flowing onto the limestone there, and we're using that natural spillway to kind of keep the water moving downstream into the river. And then there's the substation there that's owned by Excel that we are tying back into. Cannon River, I think everybody knew that. Pedestrian bridge. So that bridge was built by the DNR in, I think, 2015, 2016, something like that. So it's part of the Milltowns Trail. I think the goal is eventually, I think it's all the way to Mankato, maybe Red Wing to Mankato is like the full goal. I think right now for us, the sort of near-term goal for people in Dakota County and Goodhue County is just getting Northfield and Cannon Falls and then Northfield and Red Wing kind of connected as part of that. So there's more work that'll be done on that to the east, but we're kind of connected through this area and through the park then with the trail system. So I talked a little bit about how we were required by the FERC to do this project. So that statement there is kind of what the dam can put through for a flow rate if we're essentially in a flooding condition where the reservoir is bounced up, and ultimately what we can put through and over the dam. So CFS is just a flow rate term, that's cubic feet per second. The way I like to think about it is a basketball is about a cubic foot. So if you can imagine 45,000 basketballs every second coming through, that was our old capacity at the dam, and now we're up to 80,000 CFS being passed at the dam. And I have a little video in here, if it works, about flooding from last year too, so you can kind of see what even that looks like, and that's like 16,000 CFS that we had at the dam last year. So it's a very high amount of flow that we can feasibly pass over the dam structures itself without it water finding a way to a place where it shouldn't be, essentially going around the dam or through the dam or through the earthen embankment, that kind of thing. So this project, those gates are 65 feet long and 14 feet high. They each weigh about 40,000 pounds. That project was done, I think it was a combination of Dakota County funding and sort of a loan we gave ourselves to do that project. I think we did get some HSEM money. I'm blanking on what that stands for, but that's the State Emergency Agency, basically like the state level version of FEMA. So they provided some funding for that project too. So this is what those crest gates look like, kind of from the downstream side. And then this is the video, if I can get it to play. It should. Hopefully it's not like the TV's on crazy loud or something like that, because it is kind of annoying. But so this was last summer in June. We had about 16,000 CFS at the dam. Let's see if she'll go. Maybe, maybe not. That's kind of a letdown. Maybe I have to click next. Oh, here we go. So you can see a lot of that water just kind of ripping around the side of the dam and coming to these gates. We had actually just put our, we call those boat busters, the brand name of those buoys out there. So we bought those about 6 years ago before we did our project, so that we'd have a little bit better buoy line in front of these gates, because they do, as you can see, they do draw a lot of flow when flow is going through them. So they held up okay, but you can see there's a lot of strain put on them just from the flow of the water through there. So this will be a little hard to read, but like I said, this flood that we had last year was about 16,000 cubic feet per second at the dam. And at Welch, it was close to 20,000. And so this, just to kind of give you some history, the one that we, pretty much every river around here goes back to is April 1965. That was on the Mississippi, and a whole lot of other rivers flooded. We had, I think, a very large amount of snowpack that spring, and then we got 4 or 5 inches, something like that, over that snowpack, and everything all melted, and the rain kind of came at the same time. So that produced a very sort of uncommon runoff event. We kind of think of things in these recurral intervals, and I don't know, they're kind of a best guess, and sometimes over time they kind of change too or become outdated. But that would be like a once in every 300 type event. We've had a number of these kind of once every 50 or 25-year events, so take it with a grain of salt, I guess, the number of years, but we would have been right in that once every 25-year kind of flood last summer with what we experienced. It was certainly the most water that we had since 2010, which was a bit of a weird one. That was kind of a September flood, which is maybe a little more rare than the spring flooding that we usually see. I do not know really anything about this. I think this is probably before gauges existed or really record, but supposedly back in the 1880s there was a flood that was almost twice as much as the 1965 flood. So again, I don't know how accurate it was or anything like that, but a very, very uncommon storm then. So the project that we're going through right now and have been going through for the last number of years is this powerhouse upgrade project. So like I said, that kind of gave us an opportunity to add more concrete to the dam where the powerhouse is located and kind of beef up the structure. And then double the capacity of electrical production, or nearly double the capacity of electrical production. So we're looking at a total cost now of about $50 million. We like to say in our group that we probably picked the worst time in history to do this project. First, we started it, we purchased the turbines, got everything lined up. We had some challenges with scheduling, then we had the pandemic, and then we've kind of been purchasing things through that real peak or spike in inflation. So inflation and lead times have really changed the way that these projects are happening. And so that definitely bit us on the cost side and also the schedule too. There's electrical components for our tie-in to the substation that used to be maybe 3 months to get them, and now they're a year to 2 years, 3 years to get them. So that has been a definite challenge with this project. Now the good thing is we hope long-term this project adds another sort of 50-plus year life cycle to the dam, so that we're not having to do another project of this substantial level for another 50 years or so. I think we did talk, there were discussions too on, well, long-term, what is the dam? Could the dam be removed? And that's, I think with just about every dam that's talked about nowadays, and it's different for every dam too. I think every dam is kind of its unique different piece. And obviously we've got a park there's people that live on the reservoir is providing a lot of value too. So in addition to kind of the power production capacity, there's a lot sort of built up around having this reservoir here. So that the cost and sort of the secondary cost of losing the reservoir kind of pushed that away pretty quickly, the idea of could we take the dam down. It's probably been 10 years since that discussion was had when we first started looking at doing this project. Let's see. Oops, I didn't say anything about that last one, did I? So this was the old powerhouse and turbine. So the generators are kind of right in the front there. We had 2 Francis-style units, so the water kind of came down from the tube at the top there, the penstock, came in, ran the turbine there, and then sort of just fell out and dropped in the bottom. The one thing I want you to kind of remember about this picture is that the unit is, we call it horizontal, so everything's on this floor, and the turbine and the generator are kind of like side by side with a shaft running through them, and it's sort of level on the floor. And I'll show you how that's different with our project coming up. I like to put this photo in because it kind of scares me a little bit, but this is just like, when I say we took that powerhouse building off, we basically took it off to the dam. So this was kind of like the middle of winter, I think at the start of 2021, where that whole building was taken off. And we had put a bunch of concrete and stuff in those back bays to provide extra support and extra weight on the dam while we took off that powerhouse and then rebuilt it. So that was kind of when you're doing these projects, that's the other thing. With a facility that's 100 years old, you start cutting into things, you find things that weren't in a plan or you didn't know were there. And then secondly, you're doing this very surgically, and it takes a lot of time because you don't want to create a dam safety issue. You want to make sure that you're doing things in the right order, that maybe you've got some checks so that you've got a kind of you're providing two forms of safety or two forms of backup to prevent you from having even just, let's say something, water came out one of those tubes, you got a bad leak on what you had put on the front and water came through those tubes, that would be bad too. It wouldn't be like a dam failure, but you've got people working downstream, you've got then an issue that you have to fix. So it's very surgical and long process with working through the upgrade. Yeah, question?
Just out of curiosity, what would an average sized man be in this?
Yeah, I should put someone in there, you're
Yeah.
right. So I think these penstocks, are 4 feet in diameter at that point. So you could kind of see like where this railing is here. That's probably like neck height on me or something like that. So what you're seeing is really the full, when I said we have like 55 feet of head and the dam's 57 feet tall, you're seeing really the full height in this condition here. So probably about 55, 60 feet from the bottom of that concrete up to the top. So this has all been kind of rebuilt now with our new powerhouse, so there's a lot more sort of structure on the downstream side. So this is kind of where we're at now. This view is kind of taken from up above, looking down onto our mezzanine level. That's kind of where all the critical electrical equipment is. This is a picture of that turbine blade down from underneath, when we could still go underneath where the river is and look up at the turbine. Kind of looks like maybe a jet engine or something like that. It's a lot tighter clearance the way they build these things now than our old one. I think our old one, after 100 years too, it had rusted so much and rotted so much that you'd have like almost big gaps between where that turbine was and where the water was coming down. So it wasn't very efficient the way that it was running in its state. Yeah.
What's the size of that turbine width-wise?
I think it is 6 feet.
6 feet?
Maybe 8. I'm thinking of diameter is 4 feet, so I think it's 8 feet. Or, sorry, I'm thinking of radius is 4 feet, so I think that the width, the diameter is 8. So, this is kind of what I was talking about before with everything's on one level, that shaft is kind of horizontal. These new turbines are vertical oriented Kaplan turbines. So if you can kind of imagine, this is the generator here, the generator that's producing power. It is connected by a shaft that's going down through the floor, and then that turbine is actually sitting, that blade is actually sitting vertically. So the connection is vertical through the 2 floors. And you can imagine the water is coming down straight onto that turbine then. So it's the efficiency increase in having these vertically oriented turbines was enough for us to say, okay, we're gonna select this type of turbine and then kind of build the powerhouse up differently in that sort of 2-level structure. Yeah, the turbines, it's kind of they're really neat, but there's not a whole lot to see there from the outside. It just looks kind of like a blue tube with a few gate structures on it and that kind of thing. But And then this is kind of what the powerhouse looks like now on the downstream. So this whole, everything that's precast concrete there, that was what was rebuilt on the downstream side. The floors and kind of the base of the walls and stuff like that, that's poured concrete, but then just kind of the building from sort of the garage door floor up is a precast concrete building. We did restore the windows too. So originally the building had these beautiful windows, and then I think over time, when no one really owned the facility, it was, people were breaking windows and, kids were getting in there and that kind of thing. So when it was restarted, they blocked up all the windows. So we had a really dark kind of dark industrial powerhouse. So part of our redoing this was we had to work with the State Historic Preservation Office and kind of rebuild it in the same form that it was in previously. So we couldn't really expand the footprint or anything like that. It had to sit essentially where the original powerhouse was. And part of that too was then to put back windows. I think we like them. Long term, we're gonna have to figure out how to clean them, so that's kind of a pain in the butt for some of these windows anyway, but it's really nice to have kind of natural light in the facility too. Okay, so these were some of the questions that I received, or that Jeff passed along, in addition to, I think, history was the other question. Just kind of learning more about that. So I think I talked about the dam safety, stability, leakage, that kind of thing. It's a dam, so we get leaks. That happens. Leaks are kind of normal in the dam industry too. So we have different ways of monitoring the amount of kind of flow we're seeing in pipes coming out. So we're kind of checking that. We call it seepage, the amount of water that's kind of coming around or under the dam. We have different locations where we put like crack monitors on. So, and these are things that usually come up in that annual inspection that I mentioned with the FERC inspector too. They may say, we think you should monitor this crack or something like that. And so you're just looking to see if cracks are growing or that kind of thing. And then we have a few other things that we monitor too, just kind of related to dam safety. That new gate structure, we really want to make sure that it's locked down, so to speak, to the bedrock. It's sitting on the bedrock, so it actually is kind of anchored into the bedrock too, and we have some sensors that kind of tell us, yeah, it's there. We don't want the water to sort of push that up and cause an issue with that. So those are some of the things that we do just kind of on a routine basis for dam safety, in addition to those annual inspections from the FERC, and then kind of the various things that come out of that. They may direct us to address something or do something, and those could have a really short time frame, or they could have a longer time frame too, depending on how serious the issue is. Yeah, question here and then there.
So is FERC, is the F for federal?
Yes.
How is the new government DOGE affecting what you guys talked about in the shop?
I haven't heard too much, and it's mostly anecdotal, but I do think that same kind of, maybe buyouts have been offered to senior staff. Our person who was, we had as an inspector for a few years, he was promoted a few years ago, he's now gone. The inspector that I talked to, we scheduled our inspections coming up this month, so I just talked to him and he said, yeah, we're making do, but there's more work for everybody. So I think it's a critical infrastructure item, so I don't think it's gonna be like, this is just gonna disappear or get pulled away. I think everybody knows we've had enough dam safety issues in the country in the last 20 years or so, and these structures are aging. So I think it's a critical need, and people are aware of that. I think we do see a little bit of the sort of effects in kind of staff time and staff availability and that kind of thing, but hopefully not a huge impact.
Thank you.
Question?
If you found a crack that's suspicious, how do you treat that?
Yeah. There's kind of a few different ways. Usually we'll do the monitoring approach first, as long as it's not like, if it were a crack that we're having like real seepage to it or something like that, then we'd probably be in sort of a, let's mobilize a contractor or get somebody out here to do something. Generally with cracks, we want to be able to address them on the upstream side if we can, and so that makes it a little difficult. You don't want to be on the downstream side trying to like patch that crack. If we can find it on the upstream side, there's different like hydraulic cements and things that can be applied to deal with sort of the small type of cracks. If it's a bigger issue, then we're gonna be talking with structural engineers, some additional engineers. Maybe our kind of independent consultant that reviews things will pull them in and kind of make a plan for addressing that crack. It kind of depends on the crack and what it looks like. It might be something where you have to, I think the most severe thing would be something where you actually have to like cut out a section of the dam and redo it, but that would be probably a pretty unlikely situation too. Okay, so I've got some other slides for these other questions. So safety and debris, this is gonna be kind of hard to see, I guess, but I mentioned we kind of have our primary buoys out there, and then we have a bunch of warning buoys and signs. We kind of built this public safety plan. We're required to do so by the FERC just to show that we're putting buoys and signage and things like that out. We don't have a ton of issues with people, I haven't seen a ton of issues with people boating past our safety buoys. That generally tends to keep people away. Like I said, we added this more robust boat buster buoy for our gates there, where it's really kind of has the ability to draw people towards those gates. And the structure is really big enough where you could have, it would be an issue if a boat were to get there, you could have a boat go over those gates, or maybe even worse, get hung up on the gates. Like I said, we haven't had a lot of issues with swimmers. We do have kind of like the safety buoys and stuff if we were to have an issue with someone getting pulled towards the dam. We have had a dog during construction swimming out close to the dam. I think they've, actually our contractors threw a buoy down and pulled him out. We do occasionally in the winter, like we'll get ice fishermen that kind of come up close to the dam, and that can be a little bit of a concern too, because a lot of times in the winter we're running agitators or like air bubblers to keep that ice off the dam structure itself. So it can be really good ice, and then you get up close to the dam and that ice just goes away because we're running basically a pump that's churning up the water and keeping the ice from forming there. So we try and just keep people away, put the signage out, let them know that that area is not really great for travel that time of year. Maybe our bigger issue, just we get a lot of fishermen and women down on the Cannon River downstream of the dam. And we worked with the DNR to kind of upgrade our Dakota County ordinance. This is Minnesota, everybody wants to be in the water, you want to have access to the public waters, it's your right to be in the public waters. We did work with the DNR to get our ordinance upgraded so that the area between the dam and the DNR pedestrian bridge is kind of like a no-go safe zone. We're able to cite people in that area for being in the water or on the rock there, just due to the safety issues that come up there. We still, even when we're operating these gates on the south side, you can see down there kind of like the froth that's created and the active of that flow. When flow is not high, we see people like skipping on rocks between that water and things like that, which is extremely unsafe from just a general standpoint. I mean, it's pretty easy to be pushed down by that and possibly hit your head or otherwise hurt yourself. So that's kind of our biggest issue. I think most people are pretty understanding of that. The fishing is, if you're standing at the bridge and kind of casting upstream, the fishing's still really good there. So we're hoping that that's kind of good enough to keep people from putting themselves in unsafe conditions upstream.
How large are those boat busters?
I think they're about 4 feet, and they're kind of like cans. They're almost cylindrical. Mostly, I think they're really beefy, and the chains are probably almost too thick because, like, I helped order those 5 years ago, and the operators won't let me forget that the chains are really heavy and kind of a pain to move around. But we've worked out a good system too. Like, if you were to go out there now, we basically just tow them up onto the shore on Goodhue County and kind of drag them up out of the ice zone every winter, and then pull them out every springtime once we get to the summer pool anyway.
The beach is near there.
Yes, yeah.
So what if you've got a kid on an inner tube?
That's a good question, and I think we probably asked that question to Goodhue County too. I think the signage is probably as far as we want to go. I know their beach does have kind of little buoys, but it's not really meant for like capturing somebody. I think we did Last year when we had the flooding, you could see, like in a normal year in the summer, there's not really a lot of draw there. It's probably generally pretty safe for someone to be out in that beach area. Last year, you could see a draw when those gates were open and the water was moving towards them. So we did talk with,
Okay, so can the kid on inner tube float up next to this?
I mean, hypothetically, yes, it could
Okay,
float up to it.
Can they get over it?
I would say no. It probably depends on the inner tube. The gap between those is pretty small. It's like a couple feet.
Okay, but
Yeah.
they could, if they got over it, then would they go down?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, because that's always been a concern of mine.
Yes, yeah. It's a concern of ours and our operators too, because obviously we don't want to see something like that happen. I think last year Goodhue County did put some signage up when we had the flooding, just to kind of warn people. I don't know that we can really do too much more than that in a lot of cases, but we'll see. It's kind of an evolving discussion too. Are there times where we need to close the access because of the river flow and that kind of thing? We're sort of spoiled on the Dakota side. If you've been to the beach out there, it's kind of in that bay around the corner, that Echo Point there. So it's not something that I would think about for our own beach, but you're right, it is very close.
Do many people come floating down the cannon?
Not really, no. We've seen a few people. It is technically like a state water trail, so Dakota County has put in like a little launch on the downstream side too for canoes. So technically people can take their canoes out at the launch and then portage down and walk around. But we've seen a few people do that. It's challenging. I think we put our canoe launch in and it had a floating piece on the end. Well, we lost that piece during the flood last year, so it's hard to build infrastructure that you can rely on when you have this sort of flooding condition here too.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then the last piece was just some of the, I think in that discussion was debris, and it's kind of hard to see, but you can see that's like a 40-foot tree trunk there that we pulled off of our buoys. The skid steer is basically just dragging it through the parking lot, but we did see, normally we're not a huge river for debris. I think part of it too is that because we have that sort of crook in the river, we get a lot of debris at the beach on the Dakota County side, and it sort of all kind of goes straight down the river to there, and we don't see quite as much of it around the corner at the dam. We do have it, it's just not as much of a complexity for our river as some of the other rivers. So just on the emergency response, it's May 31st is National Dam Safety Awareness Day, so we try and send this pamphlet out. I think we're doing every 2 years now. We try and send it out in May, so it should be going to, and it goes to residents in the evacuation zone, the possible impact zone of flooding. So you get this, and then at the end are a series of maps that kind of show the place that people are supposed to go to, and if you're in that zone. So this is kind of the closest one to this building that I picked here, and so you can picture with the hill here, sort of the kind of lower area around here, those people are in that part of the evacuation zone there. So we send this out, it's part of our emergency action plan, it's called. So that's a plan that we produce and send out, but we get a lot of feedback from Goodhue County Emergency Management, our own Dakota County Emergency Management, Cannon Falls PD. We're sort of all in the loop on that, and then we coordinate on a few other items like the sirens. If you notice, on the first Wednesday of the month, you guys probably hear like the 2 or 3 times as long as most people do on their sirens. There is a message about flooding and moving to higher ground on that too, in addition to your normal tornado siren. So those are kind of some of the things that we work on. We do have the ability to like trigger the sirens from the dam too if we had an issue there too. So it's always an evolving thing, and we're trying to plan for as many scenarios as we can. But we feel like we have a good emergency action and safety program in place. So, any other questions or?
I have a suggestion.
Okay, yeah.
Last time the sirens rang, it said, this is a tornado warning. And nothing came after that.
Okay.
And I thought, well, am I supposed to go to the basement or not?
Uh-huh.
Because they didn't say anything else. I thought, oh, heck.
Yeah, I'll have to ask, because
And then before I decided whether I should go down or not, and I already decided not to, I was glad, because then they finally said, this is just a warning. I thought, why didn't they say that from the beginning?
Uh-huh,
And if they do that with a dam thing,
yeah,
I will not be in my car going up the hill.
I hear you, yeah,
So I would
yeah,
tell you that you should say this is a predictable warning. You need to
yep.
leave.
I think I noticed the same thing about the dam portion of it, the flooding portion of it, that 2 years ago, it did not say this is a test at the start, it just said like warning 3 times. So I want to say maybe we added it for the flooding section, because the flooding one comes like 5 minutes after there's like a gap there or something like that. But I will ask and see if the same issue is happening with the tornado one too, because that could be where it does not say like this is a test or something like that. And there may be some logistical challenges with like the test versus the one that, the real deal
I
siren,
don't
you
know,
know?
but I
Yeah.
wouldn't be moving if
Yeah,
if they do that the same way they did the
Sure.
tornado warning this last night.
okay, yeah, I'll note it and talk to, we work primarily with Cannon Falls on that, on the siren piece of it, so, yeah. Any other questions or,
Or Mark, can you hang around for a couple minutes?
yeah,
Okay, well, good. Well, I really appreciate you doing this. Thank you
Sure.
very much. That was very interesting.